people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it, then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
See how the trouble you've started?
Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio. All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Hey everyone, welcome to Celebrate Truth Radio. I'm your host, Robbie Davidson. We've got an awesome one for you tonight. This is episode 66, Set Free from LGBT, with our special guest, David Arthur. We're going to be getting into so much, into his testimony. We're going to get into the life being in the LGBT, many years living as a woman, and also his path to being set free. It's going to be amazing. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Celebrate Truth Radio. Well, you know, it's one thing when all of a sudden you have a chance to interview David Arthur. We were not able to meet up at Take on the World 2019, but he was there, I was there, and it's so good that we're able to go and through everything tonight. We're going to get through his testimony and so much more. David, are you there?
I am here. Hallelujah.
Yes, thank you so much. Understand you've had a busy day today.
Yeah, a very busy day, a very blessed day, and a very profitable day for the kingdom. Amen.
Yeah, it's been super busy, like you were saying before. But you know, there's a lot of people that are going to be listening to the show, and I wanted you to get the opportunity to get into your testimony because I think it's very powerful. Testimonies are so incredibly powerful, and it really does show you the power of God, especially being involved in the movement you were involved with, the lifestyle, and just the levels of depravity that you had got to, and then even getting into your childhood. So if you don't mind, maybe you could kind of start from the beginning, take your time. I know a lot of people are interested to hear your story.
Sure. Thank you so much, Robbie. You know, I started out on a rough road with my father. He took his life. He committed suicide just a few months before I was born. And so, you know, the attack was from the very beginning. I like to think when I read the scriptures, and the scriptures say that God knew us, and he knew the plans that he had for us. I like to think that sometimes maybe the enemy has an inkling of the plans that he has for us too. And, you know, that's why he steps in at such an early age. But being born, I was the baby of 4 children, and being born without a father, I desired that same-sex intimacy, that male affirmation, that male confirmation. And as I saw it throughout my childhood, sadly, there were not just, one is too many, but there were many who took advantage of that. There was a family friend, there was a neighbor, and there were strangers who took advantage of the fact that I was a young boy. I was in a house of women. I was emasculated, feminized, very feminine. And because I was seeking that male affirmation, there were men who took advantage of that and molested me. What we'll call for now recruited. I was recruited. At a very early age, this can be very confusing for a child, and it turns something on within that child's brain that really it should not be turned on in a child's brain. And I started associating sex with love, and that's what I sought. I sought out that type of love or sex with men and boys throughout my entire childhood. And so when I was 8 years old, I remember cutting school and going into the public bathroom on the boardwalk in Atlantic City and hanging in the bathroom, just waiting for somebody to come along and, in my eyes, show me some love. In reality, molest me. This went on throughout my childhood. I would sneak out of the house. I would do all kinds of things. And by the age of 13, I overdosed on pills. And my mother was at her wit's end with me. She just had like no idea what to do with me, because what I didn't know at the time as a child was that my mom held herself responsible for my father's taking his life, because they were in an argument at the time. And whenever I didn't get my way, I would say I killed myself. So I then got my way. So I was very coddled, very babied. And after I took a bunch of Valiums and I overdosed, my mom's at her wit's end. So her only option at that point was to get me out of southern New Jersey. And the only place that she could take me was to Philadelphia, where we had a family friend. And for me, from New Jersey to Philadelphia was really, it was like out of the frying pan into the fire kind of thing, because the LGBT community, which I had already started identifying with and believing the deception that I was attracted to men, when I was really attracted to the intimacy that they showed me, not the sex that they showed me, but the intimacy, because intimacy is not sex. Intimacy is intimacy and sex is sex. Intimacy is a close familial or familiar bond. And so I was infatuated with the sexual aspect of it, the attention that I was receiving from men. And very early on, Robbie, I understood that the more feminine I acted, the more attention I received. I also understood that I watched the women in my family, and I would see the attention they received from men, and it was different. It was the attention that I wanted. It was the touching, the hugging, the holding, the doing things with, and that's what I was really seeking, and that's what I was looking for. And so I thought in my head, well, I must be meant to be a girl. And I set out from that point, trying my best to be a girl and to become a girl. And I spoke to God as a child twice. And the first time I spoke to God, I begged him before I went to bed one night if I could just wake up and just be a girl. And when I didn't wake up and be a girl, then the next time I spoke to him was to shake my fist up at the sky and say, why did you do this to me? Why did you make a mistake? Why did you put me in the wrong body? Mm-hmm. And at 14 years old, Philadelphia, my mother, who was not a Christian, my mom, we probably didn't even have a Bible in our home. And we did not know Jesus. And my mom looked at me and she said, I had a son. I didn't have a daughter. She says, and you can't do this. I'm not going to call you this girl's name. You're David. You're my son. You're not going to dress like that.
What was the name that you were wanting to be called?
And at that point, it was Dana.
Dana. Okay.
I went from Dana to Paige, and the reason for that is pretty intense and important too. So, she says, you can't act like this. And if this is what you want to do, you can't do it under this roof. And so I left. I left home, 14 years old, living on the streets of Philadelphia. I was quickly taken under the wings of the older transgenders or drag queens and the older homosexuals who basically saw a money sign when they saw me because I was young and I was willing to do anything to be able to survive on my own. And I did. And at 14 years old, I lived on the streets of Philadelphia. At 14 years old, I prostituted my body. And if I wasn't giving myself away or selling my body, then I was trading it for drugs or for alcohol or for a place to sleep even. And I was buying female hormones from the same guy I was buying my cocaine and my marijuana from in the nightclub. And I was injecting myself with female hormones at 14 years old. Wow. And at 14 years old, I was also HIV positive. So when I found out that I was HIV positive, I went to my peers, the older transgenders, and I said, hey, look, I'm HIV positive. What am I going to do? And the one looked at me and said, well, so what? The blankety blank that gave it to you didn't care, so don't you care who you give it to? And another one looked at me and said, you know what? Take out as many as you can. Wow. And so there I was, 14 years old. I guess the time when a lot of people are going on their first date, going to the movies for the first time, they're getting to go to their first dance. And my only aspiration or only goal was to be the best hooker I could be. And at the same time, I'm angry and upset and I'm hurting and I'm broken. And I would just completely decide that I was just going to sleep with as many people as I possibly could. And who cares if I spread it, because I took on the mindset that the guy who gave it to me or the guys who gave it to me didn't care, so why should I? And when they actually came out with strand testing, where they were able to test the strand of HIV that you had, I had the strand test done and I was actually infected with numerous strands. And so I was infected numerous times. So, I mean, basically, Robbie, my teen years and my 20s were all the same thing. It was, for me, it was the same thing every day. It was wake up, get dressed, hit the stroll, and I mean, in between there was lovers that came, lovers that went. I was beaten, I was raped, I was tossed to and fro. I was in and out of juvie hall. I was in and out of county jail once I hit 18. Numerous. And when I say numerous, I could never even begin to fathom that I could even count even a fraction of the people that I was intimate, or not intimate, sorry, that I was sexual with.
Yeah, they say the statistics are pretty high as far as the LGBT, like as far as partners. I think it's, vastly different than, say, a heterosexual type, relationship or upbringing. It seems to be like there's just many, many, many partners, regardless if someone is prostituting or not. It just seems like that's part of the community. Maybe you could talk to that.
Absolutely. It's more or less like an attention thing. Everybody is seeking that same thing. It's the intimacy, that level of intimacy. Okay, so the best way I can explain it is we were designed with a nature to desire intimacy. And as children, little boys, they desire same-sex intimacy because it's natural. It's part of their nature to desire that. And it's so that they desire it with their father. Little girls have a same-sex desire for intimacy with their mother and for the other women in their life. When that bond is broken, when that connection is broken, they will seek and search for that connection, that intimacy with other people and in any way that they can find it. So for me, that intimacy was completely perverted and made sexual, so that I associated love with sex, or that intimacy that I desired with sex. So for me, sex was normal. I remember saying to somebody one time that sex was like shaking hands. And they looked at me, and I was really serious. I said, sex is like shaking hands to me. It means nothing. It's impersonal. Because I had experienced it so much that it really meant nothing to me. Because I realized that no matter how hard I keep looking for whatever I'm looking for, or whatever I'm trying to experience, I'm not finding it.
So was it like an addiction? Would you say it was kind of like an addiction?
It absolutely was an addiction, and it's a sexual addiction, right? And so with any addiction, it spirals downwards. And so you get to the point where same thing with drugs, you get so high, and then you kind of lose that, and you're looking for the next great high. You're looking for the next rush. And so in that world, and I don't just mean homosexual world, I mean in that sexual deviant world where everything is unnatural, including the sex, there's all kinds of things that come with being in that world. And it goes from pornography to bondage and discipline, to sadomasochism, to pain, to snuff, to role playing, to pedophilia, And so as somebody who was recruited into that movement, or molested into that movement, I became a recruiter. And so yes, I actually have recruited young men into that movement. So, and I've seen this, and as difficult as it was in the beginning to speak of, I realized that a lot of people need to know and see the exposing of the deep dark secrets of these movements, because I've watched a whole lot of children be lured into this movement and be passed around and profited off of. And then when they're no more good, they're tossed out like garbage, and then they repeat that process.
You're familiar with Hayes' writings, correct? Are you familiar with Hayes' writings?
No.
From way back in the 70s, as far as the homosexual movement and just targeting children and getting to churches and youth groups. And I mean, a lot of that stuff in the manifesto. You're familiar with the manifesto?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, very familiar with the manifesto.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff there, was talking about how important it was to, target the younger demographic.
Absolutely. And, even going further along, like into the overhauling of straight America, which was their whole, the desensitization of America. And that whole entire agenda was completed. It was fulfilled. And so everything that they said they were going to do, 20 years before they did it. And every aspect that they said they were going to target of where youth gather, they've targeted, and they've accomplished being put in place in those places. So, when they say that we're going to, after the Scouts, they took over the Boy Scouts. When they say that we're going into your bunkhouses, they they got into the military. When they say that they're going into your movie theater bathrooms. Listen, I remember being 10, 11, 12 years old, and I would want to go to the movies so bad, and we would get dropped off at the movie right before the movie, and I'd spend almost the entire movie in the bathroom because that's where the men were at who wanted to engage in sexual activity with me. So, all of those things that they said, even though they claimed that the homosexual manifesto itself was satire, it was
Well, that was their defense. I mean, that was their defense. When people,
exactly.
Yeah.
It was definitely not.
No.
And I am a living testament that it is absolutely, from the first line where they say we will sodomize your sons to the last lines where they say fear us when we stand before you without our masks, you hetero swine, So I know from beginning to end that it's very true, and it's a dark place. However, I mean, I can paint a very dark picture of all of the sex, of the deviant sex, of the unnatural, just perverted things. Also the drugs and the alcohol and the hormones and the prostitution, or just the going home with anybody and the promiscuity and everything that comes along with it. But I was sincere while I was in that movement.
Would you say you were angry at God the whole time, or did you get to a point where you didn't believe in him anymore? Like, what would you say you're, going through it? Obviously, from an early age, you said that you were kind of mad because, he created you the wrong way. But would you say that you got to a point where you were just, that your conscience was seared, or did you constantly battle with being angry at God?
I don't know if I was constantly angry with him.
Okay.
I think I got to the point where I thought that I was, quote unquote, spiritual.
Okay.
Sure. I was actually a transgender prostitute that at 3:00 in the morning on the corners of Philadelphia, I would be playing gospel music in the car, like really loud. And gospel music always touched me and moved me. And it definitely served its purpose because it would bring me to tears. It would bring the other people that were with me to tears. So it was, I don't think that I was, I don't think I ever got to a point where I didn't believe in him.
Okay.
I think that I always knew. And same thing with everybody else that I know that has come out of that movement, that's still in that movement.
Yeah.
They say, I always knew that there was something more. I just didn't really know what it was or where it was.
Sure.
Some people don't even know that it's attainable, right? And a lot of people that don't know that it's obtainable don't know that you can retain it, and you once you achieve it, you can keep it, and because they're so used to throughout their life, everything that comes their way, everything that they obtain, they lose it. But that's because they have a higher expectation of the something that they're not finding, the something that they're not getting.
Sure, and I want to talk more about that, an hour or two. I want to get into the spirituality, and then we'll talk, a lot more just about the significance of the movement and that type of thing. But continue on with your testimony.
Okay, so I was in and out of the county jail as an adult. When I was going in and out of the juvenile detention center, I learned a lesson that I was a commodity, I was a piece of property, and that I could have anything I wanted as long as I allowed myself to be a commodity. I took that mentality into the adult jail system, and then later into the state prison with me. And my second time in state prison, I had been living as a transgender woman for many, many years at that point. I had breasts, I lived 24 hours a day as a woman passed very easily. And I'm in a man's prison, because back then there was no you identify as something and so you can go anywhere you want. Back then you're a male, you go to a male's prison. And as if being a man that looked like a woman isn't attention grabbing enough in the men's prison, I'm on the rec yard and I'm cheerleading for the guys that are playing basketball.
Oh, wow.
And there was a correctional officer, and he was looking at me, and I automatically knew, it's like I had this inkling that he was going to be some kind of an issue or a problem, right? And he came up and he said, "Hey, you come here." And I bounce up to him and I'm like, "What?" And he says, "What's your name?" And I said, "My name is Paige." And he said, "No, that's a girl's name. What's the name your mother gave you?" And I looked at him and I said, "David." And he said, "Well, David, do you know that God didn't create you to be this way?" And I'm going to tell you, Robbie, I was offended.
Yeah.
I was hurt. I was angry. I was pretty ticked off. I'm like, this man's hating on me, and this shouldn't be allowed, you know? And so I looked at him, and arrogantly and pridefully, I said, "Well, of course he did. Look at me. I do this well." And he said to me, "No, he didn't even intend for you to look like that. And I'm going to tell you this every day because I can." I said, "Okay." And he did. He told me every day he would see me and he'd say, "God didn't create you to be that way." And it got to the point where I'd see him and I'd say, "God didn't create me to be this way." And I'd keep walking. And then I'd think about it. I'm like, what did I just say? And I started looking for him on the compound at one point, because what I realized was that I wanted to talk to this man.
And how old were you at this point? Sorry, how old were you?
Oh, I was in my early 30s.
Early 30s, okay.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk to this man, and so I'd seek him out on the rec yard, and we would have these conversations, and I could stand before him and I would just look at him, and I knew without a shadow of a doubt that this man, the man that hurt my feelings, the man that offended me, that he loved, that he truly loved me. And he didn't want anything from me. He didn't want to profit off me. He didn't want to kick me while I was down. He didn't want to, use me, abuse me, nothing. He just wanted, he just wanted to pour into me what was poured into him ever so freely. And that was something new to me. So I latched onto him and I wanted to talk to him, and I spent a lot of time talking to him. And around that time, my mom sent me a Bible, and I got the Bible, and I went to one of the guys on the block who we called the Bible guy. And I was like, "Hey, what do I read?" And he was like, "Oh, Proverbs, Psalms, inspirational stuff." And so I went back and I laid in my bunk and I tried to read Psalms, and I'm like, this is not very inspirational. Like, crush them, bring them to their knees. And so I threw it in my footlocker. I was reading like imprecatory Psalms. And so I threw it in my footlocker and I never picked it up again. But I made sure I went to see this officer, this CEO, because of the stories he would tell me. And he would say things to me like, "David, once you get saved, your testimony is going to be heard by so many people, because you can reach so many people at so many different levels, from prostitutions, to homosexuals, to transgenders, to this, to that." And I would just laugh at him and be like, I'm good. This is the way I'm supposed to be. So I got out of prison and I didn't become a man of God.
What were you in prison for, if you
Like
don't
a
mind me
dog,
asking?
I returned to I was in prison for a slew of things, and everything from numerous prostitution charges that actually led to felony prostitution, assault and battery, robbery, all kinds of
Okay.
things.
Yeah, I was just curious.
So as time went on, I added some more sins to my list, and I started gambling and selling dope. But when I got out of prison, there was something that was different because I no longer wanted to be a I no longer wanted to dress like a woman. I no longer wanted to look like a woman. I didn't feel comfortable. So I set out and I was just David at that point. And I still looked like a woman, but I was just David. And 2008, I started having a lot of pain in my inner core, and I started getting like I couldn't walk steady. I couldn't walk long distances without holding on to something. So I needed a cane, and then I got really hunched over, and then I needed a walker. And it turned out that I had severe osteoporosis and a very progressive osteoporosis, and my bone density was almost gone. And even the pain that I was in because of the osteoporosis, even all that pain, I was on Oxycontin, oxycodone, all kinds of, and street drugs on top. Even the pain that I was in, it didn't stop me from dragging myself to the casinos, dragging myself to the clubs, to the bars, to the corners, to the parks, where people engaged in, sexual activity at nighttime. On my, in pain, but it was no matter the pain, I could not stop trying to satisfy the lust of my flesh. And that is an addiction, And so 2009, I get stricken down with full-blown AIDS, and I had no immune system. My T cells, that's how they measure your immune system. My T cells went from in the thousands to 11 to 0 within weeks. And the virus, my viral load, the virus had taken over my body. I had infections in my brain. I had infections in my blood. I was having boils popping out all over my body. It was very painful. And there came a point where they put hospice in place and a hospital bed in my bedroom. And the doctor said, you won't survive. You don't even have to take the HIV medicine. You will not survive. And they told my mother and my family make his arrangements. And that's when I couldn't do anything anymore. And I started having mini strokes daily because of the infections in my brain. And I still had the Bible that I had when I was in prison, and it sat on my nights, and I used it as a coaster. And I picked that Bible up, and I only picked it up for two reasons. Because all of a sudden, I realized that I was afraid to die. And when I realized that I was afraid to die, I'm like that I want to know why kind of guy.
Yeah.
And so I want to know, why am I so afraid to die? And it hit me that I was afraid to die because I didn't want to go to hell. I knew at that moment that I was going to hell, and hell was what I deserved.
How did you know at that time? Was it just the conscience? Was it just kind of leading up, with the guard? You said
knew.
You just knew.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said to people, I said, I don't know how, but I knew I was going to hell. The same thing with, at that very moment, I realized, I just knew that homosexuality was an addiction.
Okay.
And it was no different than any other sexual addiction. And that it wasn't an orientation, and that we're designed in a heterosexual design, and we can't change that. And I just knew these things. It was the only way I can explain it knowing technology now, is that it was like they were downloaded directly into me, and I was supposed to know these things. So I reached over on my end table and I picked up that Bible and I opened that book. And the very first verse I ever read in the New Testament was Romans 1:27. And it was at the top of the page, and I just looked at it and I read it, and it said, "Men burning in lust for one another, giving up the natural function of the woman." And I slammed the book shut and I looked up, and I'm like, really? This one passage just completely, it felt like it just destroyed every single thing that I had ever stood upon. Every piece of my foundation had just started crumbling and coming apart. And I opened it up and I dove in, and I'm thinking the whole time, I'm like, gosh, not only am I living sinful, I am living unnaturally. I'm in direct opposition to God's very intention of creating me. Not just his not just, the creation, but just his intention of creating male and female.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say that it's like the created order, right? Where you talk about creation, but also there's that created order. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, because I think about it and I'm like, he had a thought. He had an intention before he created male and female. He had an intention, and I'm in direct opposition to that. And that just kind of changed everything. And, I accepted in this time, I accepted that my life was over. I completely accepted that I was going to die, that my life was going to end. The only thing is I didn't want to go to hell. So I dove into his word. I'm reading his word. His word was detailed to me. It was precise to me. I knew I had to speak my repentance to him. And I knew that I was repenting to a God that knew everything I was telling him. But because his word was so detailed or so precise to me, I knew that I had to do it just the way his word said to do it. And I did it. And I was just being obedient. And as I did this, I'm having conversations with people in my family or people that I don't really know.
What did you do? Sorry, let's just back up for a second. So what exactly did you do?
What do you mean?
Sorry, maybe I just heard incorrectly. You said that, after reading the Bible, you were scared of going to hell, so you kind of did something. Did you do something at that point or not quite yet? I'm talking about like full surrender and, repent of your sins.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah. So
you did this in the hospital, correct? You're in the hospital at this point?
No. Hospice in place in my home.
Okay, I see. Gotcha.
They sent me home to die.
Okay. Yep.
I had a hospital bed placed
in your home.
In my home, and hospice coming in caring for me. And this is where I just poured it all out, I spoke, I said, this is it. And I never asked him to heal me. I never asked him to heal me. All I ever asked him is to please not allow me to go to hell, because another thing I understood at that time was that he wasn't sending me to hell, but he was going to honor my choice to. And it was very, very to me. And I poured everything out, and I wanted to be free of everything.
I see.
I understood confession at the time. I don't know how I understood a lot of the things that I understood so quickly and at that time. But I did. And I understood that I had to speak the things that held power over me so that they no longer held power over me. And as I spoke these things and got like all the, the deep, dark secrets that you just keeps, the enemy has a foothold in your life as long as you have these things hidden inside of you. And so I just got rid of everything, all because I just didn't want to go to hell. I woke up one morning. Well, family and friends, quote unquote friends, um, will call or come and see me, and my tune changed, and I'm saying to them, "Do me a favor, don't ever love anybody to death again."
Hmm.
And they say, "What do you mean?" I say,
That's a
"I
powerful
lived,"
statement.
and that's a very true statement.
Hmm.
I said, I lived in a death style all of my life. It's not a lifestyle. There's no sin that leads to life. It's a death style. I said, and I lived in that death style, and you loved me in it, and you never even tried to tell me the truth. You allowed me to remain in it. And they just look at me, and I mean, needless to say, they thought I was just kind of losing it because I was dying. And I said, please, I said, don't ever let anybody believe that it's okay to live like that again. And I woke up one morning and I was like really confused because here I am, I'm in excruciating pain from boils all over my body, from my insides, my bones, my nerves, the infections, everything. But I had some peace. I had I had joy in my heart, basically. And I knew at that moment that I was no longer afraid to die.
Hmm.
And I knew that I was no longer afraid to die because I wasn't going to hell. And you know what, Robbie, I didn't have a pastor or deacons or a congregation praying for me or over me or laying hands on me. It was just me and him.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a hungry heart, and he fed that heart. And when I realized that I was not going to hell and I wasn't afraid to die, I kind of looked up and said, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to go. I said, please take me. I said, I don't want to be here. I don't want to feel like this. I don't want to look like this. I don't want to be. Please take me. I'm ready to go. I says, but I have one request. Through my death, may you be glorified. That through my death, I can easily admit now that I was selfishly thinking of my mom.
Okay.
I was selfishly thinking of my mom, like, through my death, God, let my mom come to know you so she can have life. And it was from that moment that I started improving. And I started getting up out of the bed and I started walking around, and hospice comes out and they're like looking at me like, oh, well, David, we can't, if you're not in the bed dying, we can't come back and see you, And I'm like, well, see you, bye, And my nurse practitioner, she says, David, can you come into the office? I said, sure. And I go into the office and she says, Dr. Z is not coming in here. I said, what do you mean, why? She said, because he don't have a scientific explanation of what's happening to you. I said, what do you mean what's happening to me? What's happening with me? And she said, we've never seen a viral load as high as yours in this office. And she's like, I can't really tell you that I know of any cases where somebody with a viral load as high as yours, with no T cells, with no immune system, survived, let alone went undetectable. And I said, what do you mean undetectable? Does that mean I'm negative? And then the scientist in her comes out and she says, no, no, no. Once positive, always positive. We just can't detect the virus in your system. And I'm like, well, okay, I'll take that. You know, I would take full blown AIDS. And she looked at me. I said, I'll take cancer. I'll take stage 4 cancer. I'll take lupus. I'll take whatever anyone can throw at me, because I'm not who I was. I don't have the same desires as I did 3 months ago. You know, I don't want the same things that I did 3 weeks ago. You know, I'm not who I was. And so I'll take whatever you can throw at me. And so from there, I just really just started improving more and more. And I can go, you know, I've been with what my doctors medically call undetectable. But I've also had anonymous tests done that have come back negative. So that's not the miracle to me, though. That's a miraculous healing. And it doesn't matter to me if I was to still have AIDS or not have AIDS. It doesn't matter if I had cancer or didn't have cancer, because I've had people come up to me and say, well, I've surrendered my life to Jesus and I still have HIV. And I'm like, so what? You missed the point. That's not the miracle. The miracle is that he can reach down into the cesspools of this world and yank out a confused, broken, transgender, prostitute, drug addict, alcoholic, murderer, pedophile, thief, liar, and so on, can yank them out of the cesspools of this world and creating them a new man. I said, that's the miracle. The miracle is that he saved me. The miracle isn't that he healed me. The miracle is that he saved me. And with that, I mean, so many people, I don't know anybody, let me put it like this. I don't know anybody that doesn't know somebody that is trapped or deceived in this movement. And my heart desire is for everybody to, one, know that there's freedom, that this is not our identity. See, because that's the problem, is that sin is sin. And James 2:10 and 11 says, if you're guilty of one transgression, you're guilty of all transgressions. But homosexuality is not normal sin. Homosexuality becomes your identity. Transgenderism is homosexuality. And I kind of look at it like it's homosexuality in distress. So I didn't say in a dress, in distress. But it's not normal sin. It becomes who and what you are. It becomes your everything, your life. I was sincere. Sincerely wrong, but I was sincere nonetheless. When you accept homosexual or transgender as who you are and what you are, that's where you draw the line. You truly, sincerely believe that there's nothing more for you beyond that line. So when somebody comes along and tells you that being a homosexual is a sin, they are attacking who and what you are. They're attacking every single aspect of your person, because homosexuality has become who and what you are in every aspect. And that's why it's so important that people understand that, because you have a whole lot more people out there doing more damage than good. You know, I've seen both extremes. I've seen the one extreme where they're yelling, God hates fags, and you're going to burn in hell, and you're an abomination, and you're a waste of human space, and you're this, and you're that. And then I've seen the other extreme where they're saying, well, it's okay, God don't make no junk, and he created you that way.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, Robbie, look, I don't want to know the God that hates fags, right? I don't want to know that God. I don't want to know the God that created me that way, because what the heck is wrong with him? Why did he create me that way? And so I want to be the medium. And I think that we don't have enough people trying to be the medium.
Yeah.
You know, in between those two extremes.
Yeah.
And they're seeking intimacy. I was seeking intimacy with a complete false notion on what intimacy was. We go to the mall, what do we see? We see intimate apparel. Well, the truth is that you're not wearing any of that stuff to go have a close, familiar bond with your brother or sister. So intimacy is one of the first things that was perverted and tainted. And we see that with David and Jonathan. Probably one of the most beautiful stories of intimacy in the scriptures. And if you Google David Jonathan intimacy, there's only like one or two results that say that they weren't in a homosexual relationship. You know, Jesus was intimate with his apostles, especially John. You know, that's true intimacy, when a man can lay his head on another chest while everybody's kicking back lounging after a meal. So that's intimacy. But that too has been twisted and perverted and likened as a sexual relationship. Because everything that's truth, everything that's intimacy is perverted. Everything that's truth is perverted in this world. But I give you an example. I met a young man at the LGBT Pride Parade 2018, Columbus, Ohio. Columbus, Ohio has the second largest Pride Parade in our nation. I met a young man, and we sat down on the ground and we talked for, gosh, probably an hour at the parade. And I was living in Ohio at the time, and I would drive 30 minutes, 2, 3, 4 times a week, sometimes 5 times a week, to pick him up, take him to lunch. We'd go to a park, we would hang out. And as he would share, I never held back wrapping my arms around him, embracing him, and giving him comfort. We established a relationship because of not only my life's experience, but all of this new wisdom or knowledge. Sometimes I don't know what to call it, but all of this stuff that I was just learning and grasping about my life as the example, I was able to display to him. And it was intimacy. And about 3 months into our relationship, he calls me up and he says, I don't want to be a homosexual anymore. He says, I think I'm figuring it out. Would you take me home? I took him home, and on the way to me driving him to his parents' house so he could go back home, I said to him, I said, Jay, what happened? And he said, you. And I said, it wasn't me. It's all Jesus. And he said, no, David, you showed me that I could have a close personal relationship with a man, and I didn't have to have sex with you, and I was satisfied. He said, you filled a void that was in me that I've never been able to fulfill. He says, sometimes I thought I was on the verge of fulfilling it. I had a sliver of it, and then all of a sudden it was gone. And so that was intimacy. So I dropped him up, and on the way back home, I'm thinking about it, and I pulled over, and it just hit me, and it all came back to me that every time I came together with a man, every time I laid with a man, I had thought that I had this sliver of joy or this sliver of happiness, but then it was gone. And I really started looking at those situations, and I started figuring out that it was because I was sharing intimacy, and then it crossed the line from intimacy into sex. So just when I would realize that I was receiving, I was finding some little sliver of happiness or joy, it was destroyed. And it was destroyed because I crossed the line. And it was that example that I really started looking at and paying attention to and seeing the difference between intimacy and sex. Because there are a whole lot of people out there that are damaged, broken goods. And the key to unlocking that madness that they've got themselves chained up in is establishing an intimate relationship with them.
Hold that thought, David. We're going to be going to break here just for a couple of minutes. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Celebrate Truth Radio. This is hour one. Our special guest this evening is David Arthur from I Belong Amen Ministries. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after these short messages.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Hello, Karl Marx here. Look at my wonderful hair. Notice how I sweep it back.
Carl?
I call it the 360 sweep. Beard, sideburns, and the magnificent coif.
Carl!
What? What is this?
You're on the radio. They can't see you.
Oh, yeah, I get confused. Want to learn more about the Marxist agenda and other important stuff? Listen to The Ultimate Remedy with L.B. Bork, Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern, right here on Revolution Radio.
This is Barbara DeLong, host of Nightlight Radio, inviting you to join me on a cosmic journey, exploring a metaphysical montage of spiritual material, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between, including spiritual readings for those who seek enlightenment. Let Nightlight provide you with equal measure of light, love and laughter, insight, wisdom, and inspiration. Monday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Studio B, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
All right, thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Welcome back to Celebrate Truth Radio. This is Hour 2. Our special guest this evening is David Arthur from I Belong Amen Ministries. You were explaining before, talking about intimacy, and I just want to bring this up because, you know, I did a documentary. It's off of YouTube right now because I got in a lot of trouble for it. But anyways, I have been thinking about maybe possibly putting it into a DVD form, but it was called Pride Transnation. Anyways, I went through a lot of the stuff that we're discussing in, you know, the LGBT movement itself, getting back to, you know, Hay and in the early 70s, talking about, you know, getting into the manifesto. My question to you is, you know, in your ministry and kind of, you know, talking with people, you know, in the LGBT, would you say that there's a good portion that have gone through sexual abuse at an early age? Do you see there's a correlation there, or is this something that's not unfounded?
Oh, absolutely. It is definitely proof positive of fact that yes, the majority, a very high majority. You know, I've heard people say, oh, 40%, 60%. And from my own personal experience with other people, when I was in that world and my last going on 11 years of working with people to come out of that movement, it's at least 95%. Yeah,
wow, that's high. And I mean, this is something that they would never, ever admit, you know, the LGBT movement itself. But this is what you see. I mean, you see a strong correlation. I mean, that's where, you know, they're always looking for this, you know, gay gene. It's like, you know, well, God created me this way. And we were talking about the created order. And it's like, no, this is not possible. I mean, something happens at an early age, you know, for the most part, that all of a sudden starts sending people down a very confused track. Is that something that you would say in dealing, you know, in the last many years in your ministry that you've seen with multiple people?
Yes, absolutely. And so, and let me just stress also, Robbie, that, you know, back maybe 5 years further back, it was most commonly a sexual abuse, right? Yeah. And so nowadays, it doesn't always have to be a sexual abuse because now they're raping their minds in school.
Sure.
They're molesting their thoughts, you know, in Boy Scouts, in Girl Scouts, in the YMCAs, and wherever youth gather, and there's a rainbow there. That's where they're raping their minds, you know. So nowadays, it doesn't have to be a sexual molestation, right?
Sure.
It can be a mental one, a spiritual one, and so it just opens up a lot more doors. And so, because I've been blessed to be able to go into the high school in Columbus 3 times, and each time speak to 4 senior classes. And I was allowed to give testimony, talk about Jesus, and destroy everything that they've been taught on about the LGBT and on the LGBT and their gender spectrum and all that kind of nonsense. And the one thing that I've noticed is I've had a lot of them say, well, I am this way and I was never molested. And so that's when it started hitting me. Well, no, they've been raping your mind for 12 years.
Sure.
And
well,
so
it's everywhere. I mean, you can't watch a television series, a movie. I mean, anything. I mean, and I remember early on, even in the manifesto, but even in Hayes' work, he would talk about we don't need to just become actors and actresses. We need to become the directors. And if you actually look in Hollywood, there's a tremendous amount of power in the high levels of Hollywood, not just, people that are fulfilling a role in, say, an acting job, but also, directing, producing. I mean, there's some pretty high levels that they plan to do, over, and this is the thing, they worked over decades. I mean, the plan was going to be fulfilled over decades, not over merely a few years. So you see this happening. I mean, you can clearly see this happening in any show. They'll just throw some character in there that you're like, why did that character even exist? Why did that neighbor even need to be, transgender and had nothing to do with the program, but yet they added it in?
And yeah, it's all part of their desensitization.
Sure.
And it goes on and on and on. I look at it like from every aspect, the LGBT movement is behind every little aspect that has to do with entertainment, anything that the youth are intrigued by or drawn to. That's where they are behind the scenes. Now, yeah, we see it, all over. So we're like, well, they're not really behind the scenes, but they are. No. If you think what you see is a lot, it's even worse behind the scenes. Because what we see are the victims of this movement. So what we see are some very sincere, duped, bamboozled, brainwashed victims of the movement that are promoting and pushing the movement that they believe is who and what they are in every essence of their person. But behind that, we have that dark political mass, which is the LGBT movement.
Yes.
And this mass that is enveloping not just this nation, but all nations.
So how do we separate that? I mean, again, I think you talked about how, and I believe this as well, the church did a huge disservice, with the entire homosexual movement way back. It's because I think it was so foreign, they didn't understand it, therefore they just tried to ostracize it and, come down hard on it. And I agree, it's done a lot of damage. But overall, how do we show love, or how do we separate the movement from the people? Because there's a lot of people out there that, of course, they deserve to be loved. God loves them, but not in the state they are in. And I mean, there's that whole, ministry that, you do with I Belong Amen Ministries. But again, for the average Christian, that's just, how do they approach someone in this? I mean, for them, it's very intimidating. And also it's very tough, especially when they're seeing such a strong movement indoctrinating their children. And, it seems very threatening. So it's hard to kind of, differentiate the two.
It comes down to being able to deal with the arguments, right? The church has been spending way too much time trying to argue with them why they're not born that way, right? So they come up to me, well, I was born that way. Well, of course you were. I was born that way too. We're all born that way, whatever that is for us, because we're born into sin and shaped in iniquity. Jesus said, be born again, and that's what you have to do.
Amen, yeah.
So that ends that argument.
That's true.
Yep. This is just who I am. Well, you're right. It's who you were. It's who I was too. And Jesus said, deny yourself, and that's what you have to do. So it's like for everything, you can shut it down because the church has spent way too much time arguing pointless.
Well, making it the worst sin
arguments.
in the world. I mean, homosexuality is the, unforgivable, the most deviant, awful sin in the world. They basically start putting these on a hierarchy, right? Where really the reality is, if you're sinful, you need basically a savior, right? You're in big trouble.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's because and even Christians, even the church that say they believe homosexuality is a sin, then they say, but there are also sins that heterosexuals do. So what they just
fornication,
did right
I would say that a lot of the ones that are finger pointing, the homosexual sins, they're engaged in, say, fornication, right? I guess the only difference,
what they just did though, was they actually made homosexuality a sexual orientation and not a sin by making it the opposite of heterosexuality. Just in their words. So you can't try to argue with somebody or tell somebody, look, homosexuality is a sin, if you yourself compare it as an opposite to heterosexuality. So we believe that it's a sin, so it cannot be an orientation. So it cannot be the opposite of homosexual. The opposite of homosexual is freedom. It's redeemed, free from the bondage of sin, justified. It's righteous.
Sure.
Same thing as the opposite of murder, the opposite of thievery, the opposite of adultery. It's righteousness. That's the opposite of it. And
well, that's what, like with like a Ray Comfort or Kirk Cameron, with their ministry, when they're open air preaching and they kind of come across homosexuals or someone in the LGBT movement, they just focus on sins like lying, cheating, murder. They just deal with like, have you ever, committed this? Have you ever done this? Like, we don't even need to talk about this because if you've broken the law, you're already in trouble. We don't even need to talk about, the sin of homosexuality. But you're right. As long as you don't start saying, well, this one is different than others. I mean, all sin is equal in the sense, as far as weight. I mean, you're in big trouble if you're a sinner. So
it is equal, and at the same time, we have to remember that it's not normal sin.
Correct, but then there's also a thing too, like say someone that's in fornication, eventually if they get married, then they're no longer sinning, right? Where a homosexual, if they're engaging in that activity and they continue on the rest of their life, they're never going to get out of that sin, right? So I've always looked at it that way personally. So you're right. It's not a normal sin, but sin is sin. It carries different consequences. Would you agree with that?
Right. No, absolutely. I think that sin is sin. Look, I always look at James 2:10-11. If you're guilty of one transgression, you're guilty of all.
Correct.
So what, I sit back and I just talk to them. The only way to do it is to establish relationships with them. The scriptures tell us that the natural man receives not things of the spirit. Okay. So if the natural man receives not things of the spirit, why are we going out there trying to feed the natural man spiritually instead of going out to feed the natural man naturally with what they need, which is to establish a relationship with them? Because see, like when I read the book from cover to cover for the first time, I feel like I'm blessed because I wasn't raised in the church. I wasn't raised in a Christian home. No one ever taught me or told me what the scripture means. And there was no traditions for me. So when I read it from cover to cover, I'm like, this is pretty easy. What is all the separation for? Why all the arguing and all the fussing? This is pretty easy. The Gospels are pretty easy. It's the good news. And I'm not taking Revelation 12:11, they overcame him, which means that they once weren't overcomers. So they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb. Thank you, Jesus, and the power of their testimony that they loved not their lives even when faced with death. And so I'm like, well, that's pretty awesome to me because the power of my testimony just got compared side by side with the blood of the Lamb, So Jesus called me to be a fisher of men. I catch them, he cleans them. That's the problem is that a lot of us think that we're going to catch them and clean them. So we catch them, he cleans them. And how do we catch them? With the power of our testimony. How does he clean them? With his blood. So And in essence, you said something that was really important there, is that we don't have to address homosexuality. And we really don't have to address homosexuality. What we have to do is establish relationships with them and introduce them to Yeshua, Jesus the Christ, through our words, through our deeds, and through our actions, because ultimately it's only him that can convict them and take them and change them. Only he can do that.
That's right.
That's right. And so, like, what do? I tell you the same thing I tell everybody else. Establish relationships with them.
Yeah.
Make some friends with the goal and the forethought that I don't want to be your friend. I'm going to befriend you with the goal of being your brother.
Yeah.
I want to be your brother. That's what I want. That's what I desire. That's what I'm going after. And we have to start taking back our words. We have to start, Robbie, I love it to be able to stand in front of a congregation and walk out there, and the first words I say is, hallelujah, thank you, Jesus, for making me gay. The whole congregation starts looking at each other like, I think you got the wrong guy up there. And then I look at them and I'm like, I was not gay when I was a homosexual. I was not gay when I was a transgender. I never knew what joy and happiness was. I never knew what being gay meant until the day that he touched me. Until the day that he reached down into the cesspools of this world and he yanked me out. That's when I knew what being gay truly meant. And it's important because, homosexual has went from sodomy to homosexuality to gay. And if we keep talking about this in this manner, gay, and keep comparing it to as if it's the opposite of heterosexual, then we've lost half of that battle, because we cannot sit there and tell somebody, that it's a sin when we are making it sound like it's just as normal and everyday as saying, hey, pass me that cup. Oh, he's gay. We have to start addressing things with the urgency in which they are. And there's an urgency right now. We are surrounded by the walking dead. We're surrounded by them.
Mm-hmm.
And you got half of God's children trying to figure out how they can put the flames out. We're not called to put the flames out, right?
Yeah.
We're called to reach into the flames and yank people out. But you got the other half of God's people running around saying, well, we'll just go inside and we'll pray for the flames to go out. Where are the ones that are going to come out and say, hey, you know what? I want to reach into the flames. I'm going to yank them out. I want to establish relationships with them. I want to introduce them to their Lord and Savior through word, deed, and action, simply because that's all I've been commissioned to do. Mm-hmm. My commission is twofold: evangelize, disciple. If I'm not going to spend the time and put forth the effort to disciple, then I don't belong out there evangelizing.
Yeah.
My commission is twofold: evangelize, disciple. But we cannot establish relationships with somebody if we don't even like them.
Yeah.
If we sit back and we call people names and we're talking about, well, they're just going to hell anyway because they're just a dirty old blankety blank.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, it's definitely not the right mindset or even having the right type of heart when it comes to
No,
that,
it's
right?
not.
Yeah, and I think everyone needs to, realize that. As far as though, when we're talking about homosexuality or we're talking about, sex, you're talking about how, it was intimacy that you were longing and not so much sex. But here's the question I have, because I can definitely see, depravity and sin. But what do you say when it comes to the entire gender thing? Because to me, when this kind of came on the scene and it's become nothing but stronger, and it seems like that small percentage seems to be taking over everything from bathrooms to, law. What is it with the gender thing? Because you got to remember, a lot of children now are getting confused and they're saying, well, and you can speak to this, right? But also just staying within that, where all of a sudden they get confused and say, I believe fully that I am a woman when I was born a male. What is it about the whole confusion? I mean, maybe you can talk about the spiritual significance that you see, how the attack of the created order, but also when it comes specifically down, not just on a sexual or an intimacy longing, but just the identity of like saying, I don't believe I am who I was born to be. I believe I'm something else.
Right. There's so many different aspects of this. One of the most evident or obvious, I should say, to me, is the fact that you find some type of happiness or contentness in being who you're not when you're not happy with who you are. But it goes so much deeper.
Is it like role playing almost? Is it almost just like playing dress up and just staying in that state forever and never going back?
It's that fetish. It's a fetish, right? And it's a fetish that's being introduced to very young minds. And so it gets kind of confusing, right? Because it's a fetish being played out in young minds. So we can't really comprehend what's going on in a child's mind, because their mind is all over the place. But this is the very first way that I ever really thought about it, and it really hit me one day, is they're pushing for these little boys to be able to take puberty blockers and hormones. And they're doing it with all children, right? Not just little boys, but majority of
the boys.
It's boys.
And why do you think the boys? What like maybe stop there, because I think this is a really intriguing, aspect of this discussion. Why boys?
Well, boys, because and I'm gonna link it to another movement, but this is where it links to the pedophilia movement, the pedophile movement. Is
like NAMBLA and stuff like that. You're familiar with NAMBLA?
NAMBLA, MAPS, yeah. So it goes as far as putting boys on puberty blockers and hormones. And then what does that do to them? It stops their hair growth and it emasculates them. And so if you started looking at interviews with pedophiles or characteristics of pedophiles, they like prepubescent, smooth, and feminine or girly boys. So the puberty blockers and the hormones really tie into what pedophiles want. And that's probably one of the first wow moments I had when I was really like looking at, why are they lowering the consent age for puberty blockers to 8 years old without parental consent? Why does an 8-year-old just need his doctor to say yes, and the parents don't matter if they say yes or no, that's going to be just the way it is? Well, because who's pushing all of this? I mean, we can go way back to BPA, synthetic estrogen, all of these kind of things that they lined canned goods with for many, many years before we even heard of BPA. They lined canned goods with this synthetic estrogen, which was being seeped into the food, which was being poured into our boys, right? And so you have, over the last 15, 20 years, you've had a serious decline of masculine boys. And it's becoming what they're saying, oh, it's just natural, it's just his way. Well, there's nothing natural about a male acting feminine or even looking like a girl. There's nothing natural about that. That's not natural.
Correct.
So, gosh, again, you could take it in so many levels. You have NAMBLA, North American Man-Boy Love Association, right?
Yeah.
Who the LGBT movement said when they in the Overhauling of Straight America, or the After the Ball book, which is their Bible, right?
Yeah.
Said, you know what? For now, we have to disassociate ourselves with NAMBLA.
For now, though,
and
that's the
any
key
other
word. The key words are for
exactly,
now.
For now. They said because America will not see us as victims if we are associated with known pederasts.
Correct.
Right? So now here comes NAMBLA back in the picture, because they've already completed that agenda. So NAMBLA comes back in the picture, but now it's not even prominently just man-boy love association. So now they have another group that began, and it began from NAMBLA, which is called MAPS, Minor Attracted Persons.
Oh, okay.
So now you have minor attracted persons, because now the fetishes and these extremes and the role plays and these well, let me just say the extreme fetishes, they have went from what they call, these are the titles of these fetishes, like dad, son. Now it's uncle. Now there's auntie, nephew, and then just auntie for woman.
Well,
girl.
remember, everything under that movement is under love, right? How could love be wrong, they would say, right? It's like we love each other. You're preventing us from loving each other. But when you do that, when you redefine, like even marriage, you open it up to anything and everything. I mean, there is no limits once you've opened up that Pandora's box, in my opinion.
Well, and that's pretty much a fact, because we see it happening little by little. Every new thing that comes along trying to pervert that which is natural, it opens up a whole new slew of chaos. And I mean, it's
interesting how Satan is always attacking, and this is kind of behind my ministry, attacking creation, but he also attacks the created order. And anything to do with that order, whether it's the sexual aspect of it, whether it's the gender, just the basic male and female. I would have never thought, 30 years ago that even male and female would be under attack, in the world. Right. And yet look at where we're at right now. What's it going to be like in 20, 30, 40 more years, a few more decades? It's unbelievable. But I think that the last thing that will be brought in is the pedophilia, to a point when, people say, oh no, it will never, ever be, accepted right across the board.
Well, they said that about what's going on right now.
They did. Absolutely. And it will, all throughout, history. You see this. Movement. Sorry?
The pedophile movement has already begun to lay its foundation, and it's using the same legal grounds that have already been laid by the LGBT movement.
Yeah. Also, it's like, if I was born that way, right? How can you penalize someone if genetically they're, predisposed to minors, right? Or whatever. This is what they're trying to do.
A lot of people know that back in 1972, the APA, American Psychiatric Association, changed homosexual from a mental disorder
to the DSM, when they changed it in the DSM,
Yeah, they changed it to from a mental disorder to a sexual orientation. Well, a lot of people don't know that in 2012, 2013, they actually changed the definition of pedophile from the mental disorder to an adult-child relationship. Then they received a whole lot of negative feedback. And then they changed the wording again, but they didn't change it back to a mental disorder. It's basically not a mental disorder, but it is an adult-child relationship in so many words, because they had to rearrange the words again. But why would they ever even attempt that? because they need to start testing the waters. You know, Fox, the television station Fox, and I don't know if it's Fox or ABC, one of them, they ran a TV show, or whatever they're called. I haven't watched TV in years, but a TV show or a sitcom, I guess it's called, and it was called Mick. And it was about a little boy. Well, not about him, but in this sitcom, there was this little boy who was like 8 years old. He wore dresses. And he would walk around. Well, he said something about the air blowing up his dress to his boygina in the show. And then he was walking around the set on numerous shows with bondage and discipline gear on. He had a mouth plug, like the ball in the mouth with the wrap around the head. He had the other one that goes around the face that holds the mouth completely wide open in a circle. You know, and this is a child, an 8-year-old boy.
Wow.
And these are the images that they were portraying. And so it's happening right before our eyes. When we see the little girls with all the makeup on and the high heels and the little clothes, and they're in magazine ads, and then we see the little boys dressed exactly the same way. It's sexualization of the children, because see, the children have always been the target. You know, I definitely believe that the enemy knows that he's lost the war. You know, he knows he knows the scriptures a little better than us, so he knows he's lost the war, but he's going to try to win every battle he can. What's one of the biggest things that they're trying to push, and they're trying to make everybody believe, is that there's overpopulation in this world.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, so if they can make everybody believe it, and then they have all these other people coming in, and they're saying, well, there's the dangers of putting children on puberty blockers and hormones is that they won't be able to procreate. Well, who cares? We're overpopulated. That's the response.
Yeah.
You know, but the enemy has always targeted children from way, way back in the beginning of time when they sacrificed the children.
Yeah.
You know, and so the children have always been the target. And it's not just sacrifice. It's for play, as they would say it. It's for play. It's for their deviant, the lust of their flesh, their desires. It's everything that goes against what's right and moral and of value. That is exactly why and what they're doing. And they're focusing on the youth. And there are a lot of people who aren't youth who have fallen into it, and they are like they're victims of circumstance. The target is the youth. And you know, about 2-3 years ago, 2 years ago when I was living in Ohio, I said constantly, publicly, in many, many, many places, many times on a megaphone, to people, if you want to know, if you want to see the proof that they're targeting your children, go anywhere where youth gather, and there's a rainbow there. Now go down to the nursing home, and there's no rainbows there because they don't want your old folks.
Interesting.
Well, I have to tell you, last year, in Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio, they have an LGBT group going into the nursing homes now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they are teaching the elderly how to accept, not how to be, because the elderly don't want no parts of it.
Yeah.
How to accept their grandchildren and how to address their grandchildren when they're not sure what gender their grandchild identifies as. This is exactly where we're going. Pedophile movement it's so close, most people wouldn't even believe how close it is.
And it's hard to figure that out, just because you see just a general consensus, you know, across the world that it's just frowned upon, you know, pretty much everywhere, right? So you're kind of like, how in the world could this just come about? so soon. I mean, I think it's longer than most people think, in the sense that, I honestly don't see it, accepted across the board, like, the whole LGBT where it's flaunted and parades and all that. I can't see that personally in my lifetime. Then again, I'm an old man, but we'll see. I could be wrong as well.
Yeah. I mean, there was a Supreme Judge in Australia who, and this was about 3 or 4 years ago, who threw out a case of a father molesting his 10-year-old daughter. And he said that it was no different, that adult child sex was no different than man sex and woman sex. And he threw the case out. And there was a lot of hoopla over that, but it didn't matter. He did what he was supposed to do, and that's cause a scene and see the split of the people. And so that's what's happening is, there's a whole lot of people that are addicted to pornography. Pornography is probably one of the worst vices.
Yeah.
In the entire world.
And it's accessible so easily, and then right into children. I mean, talking about children, I mean, children can access it fairly easy.
Yeah, because they all got smartphones. So they can do whatever they want. But you're never satisfied with pornography. And that's how it's designed. So I know many men and that are coming out of and have come out of the stronghold of pornography. And they all would admit the same thing, that they went from watching male-female to male, female-female, to female-female, to male-male-female, to transgender, to male-male, to male-child, to child-child, to snuff, to bondage, to discipline, all of the deeper, darker things. And that's that downward spiral. Mm-hmm. And so there's a whole lot of men out there that are watching, that would never admit that they're watching it, that would talk about pedophiles like they are the scum of the earth, that are watching child porn.
Yeah.
Even if it's in cartoon form, they're still
it's
watching.
good cover, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it was Dr. Judith Reisman who said that, and I had her on my show, and she's just phenomenal in this whole battle against Alfred Kinsey and everything. She said, oh man, how did she put it? She said that even the men who think that homosexuality is wrong will never stand up against it because they have their own immoral, perversions, right? Pornography and stuff. And they know that the LGBT movement is an immoral movement. And if they started standing up against
then
that,
they're like a hypocrite, right? They kind of feel that
exactly.
like a hypocrite. Yeah. No, that's a very strong psychological, viewpoint looking at it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, it hit home with me because, I was all of those things, and it's hard because not a lot of people, especially men, would stand up and say, you know what? Yeah, I was this, and I was this, and just that's what it was. Because a lot of times it causes a lot more strife than anything. My biggest hurdle, believe it or not, is the church.
Yeah.
My biggest opposition is the church.
What do you mean by that, though? What do you mean by that? Are you talking about like present day?
Yes, presently.
Just
right
being
now,
able to speak about being set free by Jesus?
Yes.
That's an obstacle for them? How so?
Yes, it's an obstacle. They, when I was in it, a lot of them wanted to see me free, but now that I'm free, they don't want to talk about it. I've been asked, David, I'd love to have you come and share, and you can come and you can share about, being healed of AIDS and coming out of the LGBT movement, but can you not talk about the pedophilia? Can you not kind of, make people think that homosexuals are actually looking for children?
Yeah.
No,
well, that's more of that PC, right? That's more like,
of course.
We don't want to label everyone, like a broad stroke. Yeah.
You know, and whenever I make sure I make very bold statements that say, you know what, not every homosexual is a pedophile, but guess what? Every homosexual is a victim of the pedophile movement in some way, shape, or form.
Sure.
Whether
Yeah.
it was a
It almost
victim,
fuels it. It fuels it away. It's almost like saying that every man
Exactly.
that looks at porn is going to go rape someone. But again, I would say that the majority of rapists out there, porn is a big factor behind their lusts, you know,
Absolutely.
and their pursuits. Yeah.
Absolutely, and there's no doubt about that. You know, like I can go to it's so shocking even to me, even to this day, it's shocking to me that when I go to an LGBT event and if I'm like by myself or just with one or two people and
Do you
not
get the
with-
whole, sorry to interject, but do you get the whole, you were never really gay or you were never really a transgender? Have you ever got that? Because I heard that's,
I've gotten that a few times.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, the first time I ever
like
received
a poser
that,
or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first time that I got that, it was from a pastor, well, someone who calls themselves a pastor who is a homosexual.
Okay.
And it was because I stopped outside of this building that had a big, that, had the steeple and a cross. And then they had this big rainbow flag plastered on the front of their building. And it said on the flag, God is still speaking. And so I got out of my car and I started doing a video outside of it, and I'm talking about the flag. I said, it says that God is still speaking. I said, and that's not true. God has already spoken, and he's already spoken. He's the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. So he's not still speaking. He's already spoken, and he's not changing his mind on what he has already said is completely unnatural and against his will and his intent for creation. And so what I didn't know is that people were in that building and they started coming out. And I was like, on the video, I'm like, okay, this is going to get interesting. And so I just started giving testimony to their congregation. And their pastor said to me, David, this is amazing. It's wonderful what God has done in your life. So maybe you just were never really homosexual. And I looked at him and I was like, well, duh, neither are you. I said, because you were designed heterosexual. That's your design. You can't change your design. You can deny it. You can try to scream louder than it or act like it's not there, but you can't change it. It is who you are. You can't change your DNA. You can't change your design. And but after that, I did get it quite often. I've had people say to me, oh, well, you know what? You were molested and you just, because of the molestation, you just took the wrong road. Well, if it was that, then you just covered about 98% of the LGBT population. And so none of them are really LGBT. They're just victims of molestation and they took the wrong road, right? So their arguments don't make sense. So none of the arguments really make sense. And so what the arguments that I get are like, I'm happy. And I look at them and I look right in their eyes and I'm like, you're not happy. I know you're not happy. You know you're happy. That I know you're not happy because I lived it and I was miserable when I lived it. And I was not happy when I lived it. And I would pretend to be happy and I was still miserable. And when I thought I found happiness, it was a very short-lived sliver of happiness. And I said it was just a form of happiness, just like some people sitting in the pews have a form of godliness. It was a form of happiness for me. And they just look at me because they know that they can't pull the wool over my eyes. I'm not just somebody coming up and telling them, you're living in sin. No, I'm somebody coming up and saying, hey, you know what? Can I tell you my testimony? Can I tell you, I was once where you're at. I once stood on this corner where you are standing. I did this for over 30 years. And when like in certain areas like New Jersey, New York, Philadelphia, in certain places where I was very well known, it's even better because, I used to be on their floats to represent nightclubs for them. So when I say, this is who I was and I show them the pictures, they're like, oh, I heard you were dead. Wow. Like Tom Dunn and I went to do when he was doing the documentary on my life.
Yeah.
We
That's the
went
Fire
to
and Brimstone.
Yeah, Fire and Brimstone.
Yeah.
we went to New Jersey, Philadelphia, and all that, and I was able to witness to transgender prostitutes on the street. And the one in Philadelphia, I was like, so did you ever hear of Paige Ebony? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, well, that was me. And I showed him pictures, and he was like, I heard that you died. I said, I did. I said, and I was reborn, you know, and
nice.
Yeah, it was amazing because I was able to witness to him and pray for him right there in the street, and he allowed me to, and so did the one in Atlantic City. And so it was really powerful because once you establish that connection, and you let them know it's okay to tell me about this, and that, because let me tell you, look, this happened to me. I was molested. This happened to me. I didn't have a father. And so when you start pouring it out to them, and then you look at them and they say, well, yeah, I didn't have a dad. And I mean, both of them on that trip with Tom Dunn, both of the transgender prostitutes that I was able to witness to in the making of the film, both of them admitted to me that they were molested, that they didn't have a father, and both of them admitted to me that they knew they weren't a female. They weren't even trying to really be a female. They just enjoyed being a man that looked like a woman because it fed not only their money, right? Not only for their prostitution, but for their sexual desires, because it satisfied the lust of their flesh, because the men are plentiful for that kind of perversion. You know, I mean, yeah. I was trying to give people HIV for many, many years. I spent probably just over 20 years trying to intentionally and purposely infect people with HIV.
Wow.
And there were...
This is controversial. I just want to bring this up from your perspective. Do you think that the whole HIV was kind of a punishment for that perversion, or do you think
No,
it's just...
I actually don't.
Okay. I'm curious.
What I believe, and I usually say that in my testimony, because a lot of people think that, you know, HIV was God's punishment. I don't believe that.
Okay.
I believe that HIV and AIDS was my reward. It was my recompense for my choices. So it was my reward. I made the choices, and it was my reward. It was my recompense.
Okay, sorry, so I'll rephrase you. I didn't mean like a punishment or a judgment. What I'm saying is, do you believe it was directed towards that, or do you think it was just in general right across the board? That's what I'm trying to say. It's like, do you think it originated? Do you think it originated based on homosexuality acts, or it didn't? You can look at it as something beautiful, and it was freedom for you.
Yeah, I've always believed that it was man-made.
Okay.
You know, population control kind of thing.
I see.
You know, much like the Wuhan thing, whatever. Sure. You know, I've always believed that ever since the beginning. When I got it, everybody was dropping dead. You know, people weren't living out natural, full, healthy lives. Everybody was just dropping because they had one medication. Well, they had a few medications, but the main one was called AZT. And
did you see it though? Did you see it in like heterosexual prostitutes, as far as the same type of percentage?
Not the same type of percentage, but a very high percentage. And the reason being is that the majority of the men, almost all of the men that were going to the transgenders or the drag queens, they were not just the men in the bed.
Sure.
You know, they wanted to be penetrated and be the penetrator.
I see.
And these were the men that were getting HIV and then taking it to the women.
Sure. Makes sense. Yeah.
And so it was the whole homosexual sin, because there's no such thing as bisexuality, because if there was, then that would mean homosexuality is an orientation, and, you know.
Yeah.
But so there's no such thing as bisexuality. So really it was just the men that were committing homosexual sin that spread the disease. And so like I've heard women say, well, I didn't do anything wrong. Well, sure you did. You got involved with a man who was not a godly man. You're not a godly woman. Yeah. You know, so you did. It's we all have, you know, we get our reward, our recompense of our choices. And so and I learned that probably about 6 years actually into my walk, because I got into contact with a young man. He was 14 years old when I started messing with him, and I was in my 30s. Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And when I got saved, he was 18, and I was leaving New Jersey and moving because I got saved, and I'm like, I can't stay here because I'm too well known. I need to go because I wanted to go somewhere and start fresh and be David. I never just was David, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was in the store, and I saw him and his girlfriend and their newborn baby. And when I saw him, I realized that he was sick. I could tell by his face. I could just tell he was starting to get really sunken in. I could tell he was sick. And after I moved, and I just started diving into the Word and starting my new walk. And for 6 years, it really it sat with me that I could have possibly killed him and his baby and his girlfriend. And I knew that was just a drop in the bucket to all of the married and men that were involved with women that I had been with. And I used to go as far as tainting the condoms myself if they wanted to use.
Why did you have such a hatred? Like, I mean, I know that you were kind of given that advice saying that, well, they didn't care giving it to you. But why did you think you had such hatred for other people, innocent people at that?
I think that hurt people, and broken people want to break people.
Yeah.
And I was probably hurting and way up there at the top,
Makes sense, yeah. And you probably weren't thinking about what that was going to happen, like who else was going to be impacted by that decision, not just that initial person,
I wasn't
but also their wives and maybe their children.
The only one I ever really thought about it happening to was their wife.
Okay.
And I have to say this just because I was wicked and I was evil.
Yeah.
And I wanted him to take it home to his wife. And I wanted, and it made me feel like I was better than his wife because I was not only the other woman, but I was a man and I could take her out,
Wow.
It was such just a wickedness and evilness.
Yeah.
And I connected with this young man in 2015.
Okay.
And in 2016, I got to see him for the first time. And he had let me know before.
We got about 6 minutes left just to give you an idea. All right.
He let me know that his girlfriend did get HIV. She was HIV positive. And he was honest with her and told her that he got it from sleeping with a man. And she left him. And she was actually like MIA. She was on drugs and alcohol. But he was raising his son. And he was living with his mom. And he said his mom was a Christian. And so in 2016, him and I got to connect, and I got to see him. And I told him, he said, I forgive you. I said, that's all I ever really wanted. I said, I'm so sorry. And his son was not infected. And he said to me, he says, I don't hold you responsible. He said, because you're not the only person I was messing around with. So, I kind of reap what I sow. And so that was like a lesson for me, that it was my own reward, my own recompense that from my own choices. And so now, I made different choices, and I made the ultimate choice, which was to surrender. And so he touched me. And so now he kind of set me on a mission. And so my only hope is to touch people, reach out to people, establish relationships with people, and let them know that there is not only freedom, not only is it obtainable, but it's retainable, that you can be guaranteed that you will eventually be free from all of that darkness if you just continue on the path and remain faithful.
Yeah, man. Well, in the short minutes we have left here, let's go a little bit into, on your website, it talks about that you run a video show, I think from Monday to Thursday. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Monday through Thursday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I do a live broadcast, and it's on our Facebook channel, Twitter, YouTube, which is always just I Belong Amen Ministries on Facebook. The website is IBelongAmen.com. YouTube is I Belong Amen Ministries. Sometimes you can even type in the Alphabet Man, and I'll pop up too.
Why do you call yourself the Alphabet Man?
Well, because I started saying I was X LGBT, and then I'm like X LGBTQ RSTUV WXYZ, and then it was just actually it was another somebody else had one day called me the Alphabet Man. I was like, I like that. I'm just gonna keep it the Alphabet Man.
I mean, they're adding so many letters. That is interesting that you bring that up. It's just like LGBTQ, and I think there's another one right now. I'm not sure.
Now there's the plus. And
plus.
So the plus is like infinite, infinity and beyond.
So
it's
we're
like
done.
Whatever.
We're done at the Q and then plus, because Q is questioning, isn't it?
Yeah, and then it's QA and then plus.
And then plus. So then plus is the finale. That's infinity.
Yeah, plus
Anything.
is like any and everything, and that's it too. And that's the issues with the young people is that they're, young people aren't happy with themselves. They have low self-esteem, low pride.
The suicide rates are
low
enormous, especially they always say, well, just let us get our hormones and allow us get our sex change operations. But they find that even when that is accomplished, the suicide rates are just as high.
Well, the suicide rate, it looks like it drops at first, Robbie, but it really doesn't. With the new acceptance comes this euphoria, but it's very short-lived.
Correct.
Because it doesn't take them long to realize that they're still the same broken, confused, hurting person, and they're still depressed, and that's when it skyrockets, because then they have to end their life with a vengeance at that point.
Man, yeah, no, it's really, really sad. I'm glad that you're out there. Obviously, you've been called for a reason. I'm sure you're going to have a powerful ministry, moving forward, just being able to witness and be able to minister to the LGBT. I mean, I always say that sometimes it takes someone, like going into a biker gang, it sometimes helps if you got tats and you're a biker yourself, or you used to be, versus just some preppy walking into a biker gang, and starting to witness to them. So in that regard, obviously there's a huge plan for you, blessings to your ministry. And I'm sure that you've got so many incredible stories. Everyone, tune in to I Belong Amen Ministries. You can catch all the information in the description on YouTube. If you're listening on Revolution Radio, Studio A, you can check out on YouTube/Celebrate Truth for all the links. They will be in the description. But it's been amazing to have you on, brother, and being able to talk about your testimony. I'm sure that you've been given such a, I don't know, I would just say it's sometimes so tough to be able to, like you said, bring out all this dirty laundry. You know what I mean? Even though you're clean, and that's one of the lies that the devil likes to say all the time, is like, bring up your past. It's like the next time the devil reminds you of your past, remind him of his future.
Amen.
Because he always likes to bring it up, like, you can't talk. Look at all the stuff you did, but I mean, you're literally washed clean. By the blood of the Lamb. I mean, completely. 100% white as snow. And it's just an amazing thing, right? When you understand just the power you have in his name, but also just the victories that you're going to see as he uses you mightily in his name, going forward. So again, how long have you actually been in ministry now?
It's going on 11 years.
11 years, man. That's amazing. 11 years. That's awesome. I'm sure
it's a blessing. It's an honor. I've never been honored to be used before, and I'm honored to be used.
Oh, I'm sure you are, man. It's amazing, and like I said, I'm sure the best is in store as far as what's coming up, and just as things ramp up in the LGBT and so many things that are coming this way, it's so good to know that there's someone out there that can love on the LGBT, minister to them, and set them free in Jesus' name. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Our special guest this evening was David Arthur, and we will be back next week, same time, same place. Listen to Celebrate Truth Radio, Studio A, Revolution Radio, and also on YouTube streaming. Check out the channel. We'll talk soon. Blessings all.